Western countries and their allies, including NATO, they've been very suspicious about China's rising dominance. For example, Australia, the UK and the US, they are jointly trying to advance a deal that would provide Australia with nuclear-powered submarines. That's still happening even as there are all these tensions. This is a move that is widely seen to protect themselves from China. So they are wary of China even as there are maneuverings for greater cooperation because of what the United States is doing. There's also the Quad. Let's not forget about the Quad, which is an alliance then between the US, Japan, India and Australia, with some view as to also counter Chinese regional ambitions. So the question that arises from this is, how has China responded to this? Taking all of these dynamics together, what are the chances of this escalating into an actual war between China and the West?
Well, firstly, there's something pretty absurd about all of this. Take the case of Australia. I was just in Sydney where I gave a talk about this AUKUS agreement. You know, Australia's largest trading partner, both ways, import and export, is China. That's the largest trading partner of Australia. Australian military ships, their navy, is alongside the United States patrolling sea lanes where goods are going between Australia and China. Why would the Chinese disrupt sea lanes, which is sending goods to Australia and getting goods from Australia? It is absolutely mind-bogglingly absurd that the Australians would spend money to protect sea lanes that the Chinese benefit from. There's something crazy about this. Take the case of the Quad. In fact, the Quad has pretty much gone into abeyance, which is why the United States started the Squad. They replaced India with the Philippines. India is losing interest in being used as a pawn in this sort of new Cold War against China. I would say that the Chinese are actually behaving pretty calmly. They are trying not to get provoked by the United States. But there is a warning on the table. If the United States decides to place mid-range nuclear weapons in Taiwan, I would hazard the Chinese would act against that. You know, it's a little bit like the United States walking away unilaterally in 2019 from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. Trump walked away from that treaty. Mr. Putin of Russia said at that point that he feared that the US would now place mid-range nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Some people say that that's the reason why there was an escalation of conflict in Ukraine. Does the United States want to repeat Ukraine in Taiwan? I hope not. And I really hope that the Chinese hold their powder for as long as possible and wait out the madness in Washington.
Let's reflect on NATO for just a minute, the China and NATO situation. After nearly a 20-year war in Afghanistan, NATO was defeated by the Taliban. And looking at Ukraine right now, there are some serious strategic losses. There are some financial pressures as the EU grapples with how it is going to support Ukraine, how it is going to finance NATO. What is the status of NATO? Could it even afford, could it even stand a chance against any sort of confrontation with China?
It's a very good question. I mean, firstly, NATO has been expanding its military muscle, okay? About 80% of global military spending is spent by the NATO plus countries. That includes Japan and South Korea. There's been an attempt by NATO to enter the South China Sea. You know, there's a liaison office opened in Tokyo. There was talk of an Asian NATO, which may not get actually produced. I don't think anybody's interested in an Asian NATO. When the Indian foreign minister was asked, would India become a NATO partner? He answered pretty straightforwardly. He said that we don't accept the NATO mindset. I thought that's a pretty straightforward and good response. We don't accept the NATO mindset. Frankly speaking, NATO is, an expired organization. There were other organizations, security organizations formed in the 1950s, Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, or SEATO, founded in Manila in 1954. Then the Central Treaty Organization, founded in Baghdad in 1955. Both of these closed down in the 1970s. I think it's about time NATO be shut down. I don't know what NATO's principal adversary is, okay? Because like the Europeans eventually are going to figure out they have to live next to Russia. Ukraine has to live next to Russia. You can't have a permanent situation of war and tension. And Asia doesn't need the Europeans. We don't need the United States to come and interfere. We don't want NATO interfering in Africa. You already saw what NATO did to Libya. The African Union had a mission, including Jacob Zuma, sitting in Mauritania in a plane, ready to fly to Tripoli and to Benghazi to start negotiations in Libya. And the French and the Americans told the African Union on African soil not to interfere, and they started bombing Libya and destroyed that country. I mean, the African Union was completely disrespected by NATO. We don't need NATO. NATO is not going to help the situation in the Sudan. What's going to help the situation in the Sudan is the African Union taking a firmer position against those who are interfering in that country. It's not going to help to have NATO there. How is the Sahel countries going to allow NATO or the French to come back? They've just booted them out of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. So we don't really need NATO anywhere in the world. What we need is to build our own regional security paradigms, work hard to prevent external interference. You know, the situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo needs less external interference, not more.
Okay, before I let you go, let's just talk about Gaza for a moment. There's a genocide going there right in front of our eyes. And there's a lot of criticism directed at those who are enabling the genocide, the UK, the EU, America. But doesn't China get away with a lot here? Because it has the economic and the diplomatic muscle, the diplomatic proximity. It has warm relations with Israel. It is Israel's second largest trading partner. In fact, it helped Israel build a significant port, and it is helping with a second one there. Why is China not using its power, its position, to also be the moral voice and to stop Israel's actions in Gaza?
Well, I would say that the Chinese government has done one thing which is actually very good. They held a conference of the 14 parties of the Palestinian factions, first time in decades, bringing them together since Oslo. They met in Beijing. They had a 14-party declaration. This is very important, and I hope this continues. I hope it is already continuing. We don't know what's happening behind the scenes until they make an announcement. But it is true. You're right. More needs to be done. You know, the Chinese government has been condemning the war. One thing we can say is, unlike the United States and the United Kingdom and Germany, China is not arming the Israelis in its constant bombardment of Gaza, its genocide against the Palestinians. The Chinese are not arming them. United States, United Kingdom, and Germany are arming the Israelis in this genocide. They bear the greatest brunt of responsibility. I mean, the Chinese should put a lot more diplomatic muscle on the table, and I really hope they will. Having the 14-party talks was only part of it. They need to be much more involved in bringing this to a close, and I very much hope that the BRICS countries will leverage their power not only for the Palestinians, but also for the people of Sudan, for the people of the DRC, for the people of Myanmar, who are in the middle also of a grotesque war. Makes no sense what's happening in Rakhine State and in the parts of Myanmar that borders Bangladesh. That war could overthrow 3 governments before you know it in the region. I really hope the BRICS moves from being merely a trading alliance to taking taking seriously their political muscle, their ability to move a political agenda in the world.